This was completely legal, and it gave Mercedes and Red Bull up to 136 extra horsepower, right at the exact moment that decides pole position. No one saw it. No one stopped it. And for 3 races, it worked perfectly. Until one team asked a single question, and the FIA shut it down instantly, just days before Miami. But here's the part nobody is talking about. This wasn't cheating. This wasn't even hidden. It was sitting inside the rules the entire time, waiting to be used. And what it was really doing, in the final meters of every qualifying lap, changes how you understand performance in Formula 1. Because this trick didn't just make them faster. It made everyone else slower, without them even realizing it. And if you think that's the real story, wait until you see why the FIA allowed it, and then suddenly decided it was too dangerous to exist. Because the truth is, this didn't start as a trick. It started as a safety rule. A rule designed to prevent crashes, to protect drivers, to keep cars predictable when energy runs out at high speed. And on the surface, it made perfect sense. When the battery drops too low, the system doesn't shut off instantly. It fades out. Gradually. Smoothly. So the car behind doesn't suddenly close in at a dangerous speed. Simple. Logical. Necessary. But hidden inside that logic was a contradiction. Because the FIA also wrote a punishment for teams that didn't follow that gradual reduction. If you shut the system off completely, you lose electric power for 60 seconds. A full lockout. No exceptions. And in a race, that's a disaster. You lose acceleration. You lose overtaking ability. You lose everything. But here's where things take a turn. Because qualifying is not a race. In qualifying, nothing matters after the finish line. Not tire wear. Not battery state. Not even penalties, if they happen after the lap is completed. And this is where the loophole quietly reveals itself. Because the rule punishes you, but only after the moment that actually counts. So engineers started asking a different question. Not how to avoid the penalty, but how to move it to a moment where it doesn't matter. And once that question is asked, everything changes. Because now, the penalty isn't a threat anymore. It's just timing. It's just positioning. It's just strategy. And this is the exact moment where Mercedes and Red Bull stopped thinking like competitors and started thinking like engineers looking for something deeper, something invisible, something that doesn't break the rules, but bends the outcome completely. And what they found wasn't obvious. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, almost too simple, which is exactly why nobody saw it coming, until it was already deciding grid positions. And here's where things get even more serious. Because the real advantage wasn't just about power. It was about what happens in the final seconds of a lap. The part nobody rewatches. The part nobody analyzes in real time. The part where races quietly begin to be won. And what they were doing in that exact moment is the detail that changes everything. And this is the moment where everything becomes almost invisible. Because what happens at the end of a qualifying lap is usually ignored. Fans are watching sector times. Commentators are reacting to purple sectors. Teams are focused on deltas. But the final meters, right before the line, that's where the system quietly takes control. Under normal conditions, the battery is nearly empty. The car enters that critical phase, where energy recovery begins to fight against speed. The MGUK starts pulling energy back. And that creates resistance. Not something dramatic, but enough to slow the car down. Enough to cost time. Just when every thousandth matters. Now imagine this. 2 cars, identical pace, identical lap. They both reach the final straight. Both with low battery. Both about to cross the line. One follows the normal process. Energy recovery kicks in. The car slightly slows. Loses just enough momentum. The other does something different. Something almost undetectable. The system doesn't recover energy. It doesn't resist. It simply turns off. And suddenly, there's no drag. No energy being pulled back. No loss of speed. Just pure engine power, pushing forward. And in those final meters? That difference becomes everything. Because the clock doesn't care how you got there. It only cares when you cross the line. And that's exactly where the advantage was created. Not across the entire lap. Not in the corners. Not even in the main straights. Just in the final stretch. The one place where nobody expects a gain. And the numbers behind this are even more unsettling. Because we're not talking about a tiny edge. We're talking about a gain that could reach over 1/10 of a second. Sometimes more. And in modern Formula 1, that's massive. That's the difference between pole position and starting behind traffic. Between controlling the race and reacting to it. And here's what makes it even more dangerous. No one could see it happening in real time. No flashing indicators. No obvious behavior. Just a car that somehow didn't slow down when it should have. And this is where the story takes another turn. Because once something like this exists, it doesn't stay secret forever. Not in Formula One. Not in a paddock where every team is constantly watching, analyzing, questioning. And the moment someone notices a pattern, the clock starts ticking. Because in this sport, you're not just racing on track. You're racing against discovery. And the team that discovered it next didn't try to copy it first. They did something far more decisive. Something that would end it completely. And that team was Ferrari. But not in the way you might expect. Because they didn't expose it publicly. They didn't accuse anyone. They didn't even confirm what they had found. Instead, they noticed something small. Something almost irrelevant at first glance. A pattern in the data. A strange behavior right at the end of qualifying laps. Where certain cars didn't lose speed when they absolutely should have. Now in Formula One, that kind of anomaly doesn't go ignored. Engineers start digging. Comparing telemetry. Overlaying speed traces. Looking for anything that breaks the expected model. And what Ferrari saw didn't match the theory. Because according to the regulations, every car should behave the same way in that moment. Battery low. Energy recovery active. Slight drop in speed. Predictable. Repeatable. But that's not what they were seeing. Some cars were escaping that drop completely. And that creates a dangerous question. Are they doing something illegal? Or are they doing something smarter? Now here's where most teams would make a different decision. They would stay quiet. They would try to replicate it. Figure it out internally. Use it themselves. Because in Formula One, information is power. And giving that away can cost you positions, points, championships. But Ferrari didn't do that. They went straight to the FIA. A formal request. Clear. Direct. Almost innocent on the surface. Can we do this too? And that single question forced the FIA into a corner. Because now, they had to investigate. Not casually. Not privately. But officially. And once they looked deeper, everything became clear. The trick was real. It was being used. And worst of all, it was completely legal under the written rules. But legality wasn't the real issue anymore. Because what the FIA saw next is what changed everything. Not the performance gain. Not the competitive advantage. But the risk. The hidden consequence that nobody had fully considered. Because if one car behaves differently, in a place where every other driver expects the same behavior, you don't just create an advantage. You create uncertainty. And in Formula One, uncertainty at high speed is where things start to go wrong. And this is the exact moment where the FIA made a decision that would reshape the entire grid. Not by changing the rule. Not by banning the system outright. But by doing something far more decisive. Something that instantly turned this genius trick into something no team would dare to use again. And this is where the FIA does something that most fans never fully notice. They don't ban it publicly. They don't rewrite the regulations overnight. They don't even call it illegal. Instead, they change how they watch. Quietly. Precisely. And that changes everything. Because from that moment on, every single MGUK disconnection is no longer just a number in the system. It becomes a question. Why did it happen? Was it natural? Or was it deliberate? And that distinction is what kills the entire trick. Because before this, the system didn't care about intent. Disconnect the MGUK, serve the 60 seconds, move on. Simple. Automatic. Untouchable. But now, intent matters. Now, every action is analyzed. Every spike in telemetry, examined. Every unusual behavior, flagged instantly. And suddenly, what was once invisible becomes the most visible thing on the car. And here's the real problem for teams. You can't hide intent in telemetry. Not at this level. Not with the FIA watching every input, every output, every line of data in real time. Because a natural battery depletion looks one way. Gradual. Predictable. Messy. But a deliberate shutdown. That looks different. Sharp. Clean. Precise. Engineered. And once the FIA can see that difference, the risk changes completely. Because now, you're no longer playing with a loophole. You're playing with a potential penalty that goes far beyond 60 seconds. Lap time deletion. Grid penalties. Even deeper investigations. And no team, at this level, is willing to take that risk for a tenth of a second. Not when the entire paddock is watching. Not when the spotlight is already there. So just like that, the trick disappears. Not because it stopped working, but because it became too dangerous to use. And this is where everything shifts heading into Miami. Because for the first time this season, no one has that hidden advantage anymore. No one can rely on that extra speed at the exact moment it matters most. And when you remove something that powerful, you don't just change lap times. You expose reality. Because now, there's nowhere to hide. No clever timing. No regulatory gray area. No invisible gain at the finish line. Just pure performance. Car against car. Driver against driver. And that's where the real tension begins. Because the results we saw in the first races might not have been the truth. They might have been a distorted version of it. And Miami becomes the first place where that distortion disappears. Where we finally see who was actually fast. And who was simply smarter than everyone else.